Afrocentricity.
That's right. That's right. Come on with it.
It's African consciousness, because you should not avoid using the word African, all of it. Don't use no fro.
That's right.
But that 19th century in the Caribbean islands, with its massive revolts that brought Haiti into being,
That's right.
Africa's anti-colonial wars. Winston Churchill said these Africans who never heard of a military school or wore a store-bought shoe outgentlemen some of the finest minds of Europe. But now at the end of the 19th century, Africans began to negotiate, appeal, these Christian Africans now, appealing to the conscience, the Christian conscience of the Europeans, not knowing he had no Christian conscience. It was lack of Christian conscience that led him into the slave trade. Accepting the Pope's word when the Pope told Spain and Portugal, you are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. Edward Williams is very good on this. Read his documents in West Indian history. Read his book, The Caribbeans, from Columbus to Castro. And if you forgive the modesty, read my book, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. The documents are good. Jan Carou's new book, The Conquest of Paradise. That's a book by a white writer called The Destruction of Paradise. No shortage of information. All you have to do is to read it. Tell you exactly what happened. What happened was not democratic or Christian or kind. A whole series of nations were destroyed. Indigenous American nations, Federated nations, Cherokee nations, Algonquin nations, Crow, Blackfoot, all of these were nations, not tribes. This is the preface to 1619, when they would bring about 20 Africans to Jamestown, Virginia, who began our formal induction into the American labor market. We were not the first slaves in America, or the second. They tried to enslave the indigenous Americans. Didn't succeed because he knew the forest, he knew the gully, he knew the river banks, he could slip away. They had more success in enslaving the whites. Read a book by Lerone Bennett called The Shaping of Black America. Read his first 2 chapters. If you don't read nothing else, read his chapter called First Generation, and read the second chapter called White Servitude, how whites were enslaved too. Then finally, they had to sell the poor whites on the skin game. At first, poor whites had no vested interest in being against blacks. They were poor, they were struggling, they were landless. What was the interest in being against blacks? And some of them were indentured servants, as most of the early blacks were indentured servants. They began to marry each other. But after they sold whites on the color scheme, they forbade that kind of relationship one to the other and destroyed it as ruthlessly as they destroyed the white and black farmers' alliance. And the man who destroyed the black and white farmers' alliance later helped to establish the Ku Klux Klan. All of this is forgotten. All this 19th century struggle with Douglas, forgotten. The 19th century struggle in Africa, when Africans did not negotiate anything. They took their spear and their shield and went to the battlefield and negotiated in blood. They announced that negotiation through their manhood. At the end of the 19th century, missionary trained Africans, Caribbean islands, Africa, Christian Africans in the United States began the whole track of appealing to the Christian conscience of people who wasn't Christian in the first place. Now they would start the Pan-African Congress, started by a Caribbean lawyer, H. Sylvester Williams. It is a bit of irony that the three great Pan-Africanists all came from Trinidad. H. Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, George Padmore. I never knew H. Sylvester Williams. I knew James, and we were friends and colleagues till the day he died. I knew George Padmore in the United States, and I knew him again in Ghana when I was there in 1958. I asked him a question. He told me, stop meddling in his foreign business, in his personal business. I say, of all of you were Pan-Africanists wanted the unification of the African world, all three of you have had children by a black woman that you never married. None of you have established a long relationship with a black woman. Where is your Pan-Africanism when the door is closed and the bed is ready? Man, stop meddling. My personal business is my personal business. I left it there. It's a contradiction. And yet, all three men made a major contribution to the concept of the unification of African people. Du Bois, who never liked being called the father of Pan-Africanism because it was incorrect. Du Bois was a guardian of truth, and he wanted to be called the guardian or the keeper of the Pan-African tradition. He never said he was the God, he was the founder of anything, and he wasn't. And he didn't pretend that he was. But his over-enthusiastic followers gave him credit for a lot of things he did not do, failed to give him credit for a lot of things he did do. Intellectually, Du Bois was the finest example of a functioning intellect we have produced in the whole of the Western world. As we entered the 20th century, we entered the 20th century with a debate. The debate was over Pan-Africanism and nationalism. The debate was over something we haven't even settled today. What kind of education we need for tomorrow? What kind of education we need for our children? We were debating between Booker T. Washington's approach and Du Bois's approach. We were wrong then, we are wrong now.